Hi, thank you so much for giving me some space to talk about trying to change in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I first want to thank Rick for a conversation that we had, we think, in January in Washington, D.C. that said, we should really gather people again like this. And then enormous gratitude to you, Bill, for taking that and actually creating this in this space. So just thank you. Really, really appreciate that. I feel a little embarrassed about our logo being as big as yours because I feel like we kind of had the idea, but you really, really took it up in your team. So thank you.
Any explanation of the picture, or we'll just let that go?
I'm gonna let it go and let people. My photographer said, do something. And so I did. And then he was like, okay, that's the show. Okay. I took a few slides to get started. So my name's Daphne Carlson. I am what's called a division head, the Division of International Conservation. And we are a division within International Affairs, which sits within the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I just also have to acknowledge I'm the one up here talking, but the entire evaluation team is here today. So you heard from Matt Muir earlier. You see Shannon Rivera running around and Ms. Tatiana Hendricks. And so really, I just get to be the one to say this good stuff that they're all doing. Just to give you a little bit of context, the Fish and Wildlife Service is a bureau within our Department of Interior, and that department is charged with protecting and managing our natural resources and our cultural heritage. The division, so specifically, our mission is to work with others to conserve the world's diverse wildlife and their habitats. We sit next to our Management and Scientific Authority with International Affairs, so you may know some of our colleagues from the world of wildlife trade and CITES. Hopefully that give you a little bit. This is how our division is structured. I'm giving you a little bit of background so you can understand some of the challenges we have ahead. We are separated into geographical branches as well as one threats-based branch. And our financial assistance branch makes it all happen. So we are stewards of finances, and we send that money out as financial assistance, and we provide technical assistance and support as well. You may also know us from our species conservation funds. So this is quite a wonderful and unique conservation strategy where U.S. Congress has passed legislation that says it is in the U.S. public's interest to conserve these species and to do it through in situ conservation efforts. And we're going to give you your own money each year, like your own appropriations. So the money for these programs comes through separately from our other appropriations. So it's pretty special. Matt referred to our beginnings, right, in 1990. And the year marine turtle was authorized early 2000s, I think early mid 2000s. So we haven't had a new species fund since then, but we're happy with this. Oh, right. I meant to say something. We have really good news today. As of today, the division and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has signed on as an evidence champion. So we signed the agreement, and we think, we think we're the first government agency to do so. We might be the second, but we're definitely the first U.S. government agency. So we are really proud and happy to make explicit our commitment to this work and to how we're going to use it in our programs moving forward. I've taken a bit of a strategy. I thought maybe you might like some inspiring photos while I'm talking. They will cycle through, so hopefully I won't lose your attention totally. But these are all photos from the projects that we have funded through these programs over the years and the location. So just to give you an idea of the breadth of the work that we're doing in these programs. Okay, so that's a little bit of who we are. And the question now is like, why is this important? And I'm not exaggerating when I say I think this evidence work might be the single most important thing I do in my tenure in this position. That if I can integrate and institutionalize evidence work, whatever that looks like, into these programs, I will feel like I have really made a contribution. For scale about our programs, we receive about $20 million, $20 to $25 million a year and appropriations through our species funds and other funds. We also have great relationships with other U.S. departments. So we know the U.S. Agency for International Development. So we have agreements with those agencies to give us money, and we implement conservation programs that meet both the department's missions and goals. And right now, our two USAID agreements are valued at about $100 million that we have a significant amount of time, like 5 to 10 years to expend. So, you know, in the world of conservation, it's some significant investment that we're hoping to direct as best we can. So why am I doing this? In addition to, like, the most important thing for me to be in this position, I'm a conservationist at heart, and I get to lead a division of about 35 people who show up every day because they really care about the work, and they're willing to manage the bureaucracy of working for the US government because it's so important to them. But I'm also a public servant, and I am a steward of US taxpayer dollars. And so to administer and oversee these programs is an imperative. Like, I don't even think of it as a choice, right? It's a responsibility. And I would hope that that ethos, you know, permeates this room as well. But enough of that. Bill told me, don't worry, we're in the room of the converted, right? So I don't need to spend a whole lot of time saying the why, but maybe the how. How do we kind of create some change in these systems? So I was trying to think about how to structure these thoughts. I created these buckets of, first, I wanted to think about what do I have control or influence over, right? So in my position with what I'm the decision maker for, what do I control? What do I need to ask permission for? And what can I, you know, kind of go do on my own? I also thought about accountability. Like, how are we going to keep ourselves accountable? Because there's great social science that says if you actually state what you're going to do and even share it with a friend, you're more likely to reach your goal and outcome, right? So what does that mean for an organization? And then the people, which is probably the hardest and most important part. So decision making. We've been diverting resources to this work, and that comes at a cost of not doing other things, right? And so we have staff now. I mean, we have 2 full-time people, and we borrowed Tatiana for as long as we can have her from another program. So that's great. 3 people's not really enough, but I'm super grateful that I have even what I can call an evaluation team. And that means choosing to fill those positions, you know, over others. Perhaps more importantly is financial resources, right? So we are diverting significant programming funds and dollars to this work. Matt and I were trying to decide a back of the napkin calculation last night, and we think we're close to the 5%. So we think now with a new partnership that we have with the Canadian Center for Evidence-Based Conservation and Conservation Evidence moving forward, that we are going to be approaching 5% of our budget is going into evidence work broadly. So we're really proud of that and hope that we can keep doing that. Next, I just want to say that we do have to consider this an enabling environment too. I didn't mention that, right? So in the US, we actually have some legislation around using evidence in policy making. So we have the Evidence Act, which if you're interested, Matt can answer more specific questions on this, and the Foreign Assistance, Transparency and Accountability Act. So while we're doing the evidence work, because we think it's really important for conservation outcomes, we're also meeting some expectations and recommendations for all US government agency programs. And that's great framing for us when we go and talk to people, right, who care about this work. Like, we care about conservation, but we really care that we're being good stewards of these programs as well. I think the other benefit of that is we have a new community of federal evaluators that are doing this work in other sectors. And that's been a great way to learn, like within the US government context, right? Like, what have you tried? What are you doing? What's your budget? How much staff do you have? Like the sort of like the nuts and bolts of how to make this real within a government bureaucracy. And so just acknowledging that we really, I think we're still leaders in the US government, right? First agency to join the evidence champion, but it's been great to find these pockets of colleagues and experts to lean on and try and figure out how we can do the same or, you know, different. Holding ourselves accountable. So I think like signing on to the Champions Agreement was a pretty good way to say, like, we are actually committed to these things. We signed our name to it, and we will continue to make those efforts. We also took the step of like contributing to our department's learning agenda, right? So we told the Department of Interior, we are going to collect baseline data that says how much of what we're funding has evidence of being beneficial. So this is like the hard question that people sometimes are afraid to ask. And what if there's not evidence that what we're doing works? So we did it. We said we're gonna do the analysis, and then we're going to commit to 4 more years of trying to improve that baseline. And so I'm really proud that we sort of put ourselves out there and, gave ourselves a goalpost to try and get to. So all this is, oh, did I do that? Oh. Oh, sorry. I need to just put this down. Like review the slides. Okay. All really important, right? Like I can decide to put resources here. We have an enabling environment, holding ourselves accountable. But I will tell you, in all the conversations we're having this week and that kind of days, I think about how am I going to make this real, right? Like, because it's one thing for Daphne up here and say these things, but I'm not the one who's going to actually make it real on the ground. And so that starts with the rest of my staff, right? The staff who actually are the people that are administering these programs that are connected to our on the ground partners, right? So we're a technical advisor, we're a donor, we're not the ones doing the conservation actions on the ground. And I will tell you, like my staff have a healthy skepticism of the work that we're all doing and talking about, as they should, right? They don't feel connected to the academic community. They feel separated from the conversations that are happening. And so if this is going to work and like live beyond me in this position, being the decision maker, my first step is to have the staffs not just buy in, but to be champions, right? And then that's going to translate to our implementing partners, right? Who they have a very close, as Matt said, sometimes we've had decades of relationships with these implementing partners. And so everything we talk about and everything we're doing, I'm thinking about staff and what do they need? And what do I need to do to bring them in? So what have we done? Well, we've done some work that Trina's going to talk about tomorrow on specific learning questions that we started with. And we've invited staff to be a part of that process. Like come in, help us decide what learning questions we want to ask and how to prioritize it. And then be a part of it, contribute your knowledge, contribute your expertise. And so they're authors on these papers and having them engage at the beginning, like helps buy-in, right? Like they get to shape it and be proud of it. The next thing we've done is like we asked for feedback, right? So Tatiana went and interviewed all of them and asked for like real feedback on the evidence work. What do you think? What's working? What's not? And then we committed to providing a management response to that feedback. So I don't know if any of you guys are supervisors, but like asking for and receiving authentic feedback is super hard, right? And it's like super hard because it's true. If they didn't have true things to say, I don't think we would react. So I got some really great advice, like maybe take a walk when you read the summary feedback. But it's so important, right? Because their ideas are things we're not thinking about. And their ideas are what's going to make it real and practicable. Is that a word? Thank you. On the ground. The next thing is they have a really high administrative load, right? They're managing US government funds. I don't know if any of you guys have tried. I think many of you in the room have. It's a lot of work, right? So it's a lot of work on our side as well. And so if I'm going to ask them to add a new component to what we're doing to make it part of everything we do, then I have to commit to giving them the resources to do that. And so part of that is providing like internally, Matt and Tatiana and Shannon, help them. But part of the work moving forward is like when we start generating evidence, we need to also generate tools that creates a toolbox for them to actually use the evidence in a way that is, really that's easy, right? They can digest it, they can use it, and it becomes part of the process. And so it's not just about, it's really resonated with me, Steve, when you said, right, you did this big systematic review, but then you had to bring in the practitioners to like extract out like how to make this digestible and usable. So we're committed to doing both things, right? Not just generating the evidence or but making it real for them. The other thing that we have to really stay open to is they really care about this question about what counts as evidence, right? So when we're planning like what we're going to do and what our critical evidence is, it's really important to include them in those conversations. They care a lot about Indigenous and local communities and their knowledge. They want to be incredibly inclusive in what they're doing. And so we've had to stay open and flexible about what are we going to consider as evidence and how to incorporate all those different types of evidence into this work. And lastly, I just say that, I don't want anything less than like a transformation in how we're doing our work, right? So Bill and I talked about this yesterday. Like the goal is to change the way for doing conservation. And that means making it accessible and real to the people who are really on the ground. Otherwise, like in 5 years, it's just going to be us in a room again, you know, talking about it. And that won't be a success. And so taking care of my people who will then take care of the implementing partners is the way I believe that this relatively small program is going to have real impact in the world of conservation. I think those are my big buckets. I mean, the last thing I'll say is like, my job is really only to create the environment for all these people to do their work, right? I need to give them what they need and a space to do it well. That means a space to give them cover, right? If I'm asking them to ask really hard questions about the effectiveness of maybe something they've been working on for 15 years or 20 years, I need to let them know that I'm here to say, yeah, we're going to ask those hard questions. And if the answer is that it's not effective, we're going to accept that and start doing more of what works, right? So we want to do more of what works and less of what doesn't. So that's where we are. I'd say we're in the beginning of our journey. You know, maybe check in a year and see how we're doing. Right. So if you are leading an organization, I would just invite you to think about what you actually have control and influence over. I suspect it's more than what you think, right? I work within the US government, right? We have a box that we have to work in, and we've been able to be pretty creative and innovative within that space. How are you going to hold yourselves accountable? And, you know, how are we going to really make this real for the people on the ground that I think are going to be the ones that get transformation?
But we can leave it going, I think. In terms of moving
No.
slides.
I didn't know if you were going to take questions or.
Yeah, I want to take questions. Anyone got any questions? We have some time. Yes.
Hi, Clive Mitchell from Nature Scott. That really interesting to see that. It sort of triggered a thought that's been running through my mind all day. Where a lot of the focus of the talks and the discussion is about the sharp end of conservation, where it happens on the ground with local communities and so on. And clearly, it's really important to get the evidence right to make those interventions as good as we can. But a lot of the reason why, you know, the species that you're concerned with are endangered is because of patterns of consumption in developed countries and the global north in particular. And in terms of some of the activities that we get involved in the UK in terms of conflicts of interest between farmers and conservation and so on, are driven a lot of the time by people who aren't in the room, big farming corporations, food merchants, seed merchants, agrochemical companies, machinery producers, etc. And they're sort of just sitting there invisible, driving a lot of the tensions that we experience on a kind of day-to-day basis and so on. So I guess my question is there a way of applying these techniques to address issues that are, as it were, operating at a bigger scale than the activity on the ground, but are actually, you know, influencing or driving a lot of those activities behind the scenes?
I mean, I think so. I hope so. Some of the learning questions that we have been pondering and trying to prioritize are what we would call enabling conditions, right? So some of it's really specific interventions and some of it's an enabling condition. And so one of those is training capacity. So I was really happy to hear that we invest a lot in capacity building for conservationists through programs. And then we just heard it again, that's what really needed. But that's an enabling condition, right? So we believe that that's maybe a harder question, but we absolutely should be trying to generate the evidence for some of these. I feel like Nick Solowski now, right? The box up there that's an enabling condition. So yeah, absolutely. And then we definitely have a program on illegal wildlife trade, and Tatiana would be the expert to talk to, but that program also looks at that whole trade chain and trying to understand, you know, points of intervention where it makes sense. It's a bigger problem if you're talking about consumer consumption and behavior change. So we're not shying away from any of the bigger picture questions.
Great, thank you. Okay.